North Carolina. We're going to be talking about that a little later in the show, but I want to talk a little bit more about the president and his comments. The House is going to vote later today on a resolution to impeach President Trump. It's a measure that's being pushed by Democratic Representative Al Green, who says that the president's recent comments demonstrate that he's unfit to be president. It all started when the president tweeted on Sunday telling 4 congresswomen of color to go back to the countries they came from. 3 of the 4 were born in the United States. All 4 are U.S. citizens. On Monday, his attacks continued.
These are people that, in my opinion, hate our country. If you're not happy in the U.S., if you're complaining all the time, very simply, you can leave. You can leave right now. They're very unhappy. I'm watching them. All they do is complain. So all I'm saying is, if they want to leave, they can leave.
All right, President Trump is praising the Democrat-led House vote condemning those tweets, but it was backed by only 4 Republican members: Will Hurd of Texas, Fred Upton of Michigan, Susan Brooks of Indiana, and Brian Fitzpatrick of Pennsylvania, and the Republican-turned-independent Justin Amash of Michigan. But so far, 36 of 250 Republican lawmakers say they condemn the comments. That's 14% of the House and the Senate. Even Trump ally and former White House Communications Director Anthony Saramucci called out Trump's tweets as racist and unacceptable, saying America is a nation of immigrants founded on the ideals of free thought and free speech. Anthony Saramucci joins me now. My friend, we have to dip into to Nancy Pelosi when she talks about this.
No problem.
You and I have known each other for a long time, and there's a sort of a story that people who come of immigrant families, it's sort of like a handshake or a wink and a nod, that they know of the stories, right? Everybody who's got an immigrant-sounding last name or their color is different has heard some version of go back to where you came from. Have you heard that in your life?
I personally haven't heard that, but my grandparents heard it. You know, my grandmother couldn't get a job, very educated in Italy, got here. The signs in the shopkeeper's signs were Nina, no Italian need apply. That also stood for Irish, no Irish need apply. And so we've had discrimination in our society, we've had segregation, we've had all these issues, but the society is advancing and progressing, and it is a wonderful place to be. I mean, it's a grand experiment. You and I are living the American dream as a result of the sacrifices of people that came from another country. So, listen, I don't want to beat on it all day. I made my comments. The comments are unacceptable from the president. They are racist. I don't view him as a racist. I support the president, but I don't think that we're advancing the society's agenda going in that direction. The women that he's attacking, he's giving them great standing, not just here in cable and the Beltway.
Yeah, you're totally right. I think 3 days ago, most Americans couldn't name all of them except Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez.
They were fighting with Speaker Pelosi. And so they were calling her racist, and they were fighting with each other. And so, you know, the president could have let that go, and that would have disintegrated right there. He can call them racist or anti-Semitic based on some of the comments that they're saying. But saying go back to your own country, that's like a really bad thing, because it is a whistle for everybody in an ethnic community. It says, wait, whoa, first it's me, then it's your family, Ali, then it's the next family, and that's the domino effect of division in the country. And it's not American. We don't think like that. We don't stand for that. But I don't want to beat on a dead horse. I mean, you know, I'm surprised that more Republicans are not being honest with the president.
So that's an interesting point. Being honest with the president is the important part.
Exhaust the system. You know, Joe McCarthy exhausted the system. So what ends up happening is
it sucks up all the air.
You get everybody riled up. Then they get exhausted, and like a hula hoop or a frisbee, they drop it. And the minute they drop it, you lose your standing. And so you get so many good things to run on: the economy, growth, free enterprise system, deregulation.
So you have always, one of the reasons you were at the White House is you enjoyed a good relationship with the president. After you left the White House, you said the same thing, that you enjoy a good relationship with the president.
Well, I mean, I haven't talked to him recently, but I like the president a great deal. I like him enough to tell him the truth. You know, I mean,
so what's the message to him right now? What does he do?
I think you want to, I get the point, you want to label the Democratic Party as that squad. And if you do that successfully and they pull those candidates over to their positions, you'll likely win a 40-state landslide. But drop the racist rhetoric, because what that's going to do is it's going to upset 15% of the people in the middle that are moderates that would probably like to vote for you. They're going to say, wait a minute, that's not flavorful for me. I'll go with somebody's policies that I don't like because they're not going to do that from a style. You know, remember, it's a what and how thing with the president. Focus on what you're doing, which are, in my opinion, very good for the country. How you're doing it, you could do that better.
So to the extent that it is part of your narrative, the idea that you have come from a family that has come from away, which is a part of a lot of people's American narrative, this isn't enough to cost Donald Trump your support.
Not at this point. If you keep going in that direction, it won't just be.
But what does that look like? Is there anything, Donald? Because he's got a lot of stuff. Let's put it up on the screen, so you can see the stuff that he said that would have.
I know it.
Right, you've seen it, right?
I see the whole thing.
It's birtherism. It's calling Mexicans rapists. It's shithole countries. It's all that kind of stuff.
I got it, but it's a duality of the president. On the flip side, he's passed prison reform. On the flip side, he's come up with great policies that have lowered the unemployment rates in some of the areas of the country like that. I see it. There's a mixed bag of things, and people can pick and choose from the bag and say the president's racist or not racist. But knowing him personally, seeing what he did during the Martin Luther King Jr. controversy 25 years ago, where the New York Stock Exchange was left open, and President Trump worked with Reverend Jesse Jackson, Reverend Al Sharpton, Rosa Parks, to get it closed to honor Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. on his national holiday. Those are the types of things I like to think of the president about. You know, when you ask me straight up, jugular test of authenticity, is he a racist? He is not a racist. But if you're going to continue to say...
But look at all these things. How can you not be a racist and do all these things that he's accused of doing?
Okay.
I mean,
okay, we can go through them. Go back. Okay, I don't like that. I think that's racist. The birther thing, I don't fully understand. I understand the African American community views that as racist.
Let me tell you about the birther thing. So he said that President Obama,
the Mexicans, he said President Obama, a flippant comment that he made during his introduction. Go ahead.
Yeah,
I can go through the list with you. I'm not here to defend the list.
Right, but how do you come to the conclusion that he's not racist when you see that list? I mean, there may be things on that list you don't like.
The average American will say things that they regret. The average American will say things that they wish they could take back. Trust me, I got fired for saying something that I wish I could take back. So obviously that happens. And so he's 73 years old. You've got 7 things listed there. He's probably got another 40 or 50 that he said that are sounding and looking ridiculous.
So at some point when it looks like a duck and quacks like a duck, you're not prepared to call it a duck?
I am. No, I am. If he continues on the path of telling people to leave the country and divides the country and stuff like that, then you have to make a decision. You can't choose the person over the country. You can't choose the policies over the country. You know, at the end of the day, you know, I like the president. I want to be a loyal supporter to him, but I love the country. Okay, and so you can't tell people to go back to the other country. And by the way, my grant support you. So tell us what you guys want to do. Now, the elected Republicans, if they all came out, there were 250 of them on that list or whatever, would say, hey, terrible, can't talk like that. I think the president would conform his behavior. You know, he needs straight up honest feedback and an honest analytical assessment of what's going on. But so what's happening now in Washington is, look, I got to stay in power. I don't want to get primaried. I don't want to say anything that's going to upset the president. So I'm going to keep my mouth shut, even though I know I'm right. And you're a good journalist. You know there are White House aides that think what the president said is racist and unacceptable, but they're never going to say anything. They'll whisper it to you on the phone, Ali, it's off the record.
So you gave an interview to CNN.
I think that's not serving the president well, actually.
You're one of my most well-read friends, and you read, when you were talking on CNN, you quoted from JFK's book, Profiles in Courage. And I want to just take another quote out of that book, because you hold him in high esteem. In whatever arena of life one may meet the challenge of courage, whatever may be the sacrifice he faces if he follows his conscience, the loss of his friends, his fortune, his contentment, even the esteem of his fellow man, each man must decide for himself the course he will follow. The stories of past courage can define that ingredient. They can teach, they can offer hope, they can provide inspiration, but they cannot supply courage itself. For this, each man must look into his own soul.
Okay, so we've obviously read that book. I've read that book many times, and I think the point that John F. Kennedy was making in that book, and he made another point which I'd like to make, is number one, you sometimes have to step out of the system, step out of the politics, reflect what's going on in the society, and stand up for the society. And so that's what we have to do as a group of people. I don't like the squad. I don't like their ideology.
But that's not relevant, right? I mean, you don't have to.
They are democratically elected officials. They are citizens of the country. One was naturalized. Right. Others are born here. They have the right to say.
You and I have argued we don't have the same views on things, but neither of us has ever told anybody to go back.
There should be some level of civility. The last thing, very important, what John F. Kennedy also said is that he studied the other side because he really wanted to understand. He said there are super smart people on the other side. Let me understand what they're thinking and saying. And he was a guy that could hold two diametrically opposed ideas in his brain and synthesize those, Ollie. And we need more statesmen like that in Washington that say, okay, I got the president's point, I got the squad's point. Don't do that. It's classically un-American, and we're progressing the society now to a point where we should be post-partisan, post-identity on issues like that.
And the only thing I'd interrupt you for is because Nancy Pelosi is speaking on this. Anthony Saramucci, thank you very much. Let's listen in to Nancy Pelosi.
And a clarion voice for justice, equality, and the rule of law. Justice John Paul Stevens. Justice Stevens was a true guardian of the Constitution. He made history not only as the longest-serving justice, but as one of its finest. Our country mourns his loss. He will be lying in state Monday. The service will be Tuesday. And again, it is a great loss to our country. Today, last night I had a particular pleasant experience, which was to sign the legislation which enabled us to use the Washington Monument as a backdrop for the moon launch. Pretty exciting. I hope everyone will take advantage of observing that as we observe that historic event in our country's, the world's history. It's pretty exciting. So here we are. As you know, we campaigned on For the People agenda, lowering health care costs, building bigger paychecks, cleaner government. And to that end of bigger paychecks, this week we will have 3 bills on the floor. Raising the minimum wage. Raising the minimum wage. It will increase wages for up to 33 million workers and lift 1.3 million Americans out of poverty. It would help secure fairness and equality for women, many of whom will be the beneficiaries of this, giving nearly 20 million working women a raise and help narrow the gender gap. Excuse me, that wage gap that disproportionately impacts women. We're also proud to pass this bill tomorrow on the anniversary of the Seneca Falls Convention, which America declared that all men and women were created equal. We'll also continue on to deliver our promises to workers. Today, we'll honor our promise to be to the hardworking men and women of labor as we lift the Cadillac's tax, protecting health benefits that workers have negotiated. And next week, the House will move to pass the Butch-Lewis Act, ensuring that millions of Americans who receive the retirements will receive the retirement and benefit securities they have earned. We're very pleased at the outcome of all of the back and forth on the census, proud of the testimony that our House counsel made before the Supreme Court, because the census is a pillar of our democracy enshrined in our sacred Constitution to ensure that we are all equally counted and represented. And so we will continue to follow the facts and hold the administration accountable for the policy decisions. This is not about partisanship. It's about patriotism. And now, having instilled fear, hopefully we can allay that fear by having people sign up for the census. As we approach the 200-day mark of our transformative majority, which is coming up soon, House Democrats will build on the bold promise we have made on our For the People agenda. We talked about lower health costs by preserving the prescription drug benefit and lowering the prescription drugs and preserving the pre-existing condition benefit. And some of that legislation will be coming up next week. Raise workers' wages. I talked about that. Reduce the role of big dark money in Washington, H.R. 1. But part of H.R. 1 we have divided into parts to save our federal elections, the Voting Rights Act, and the rest, and we're hoping to get some of these passed discreetly. As you know, Senator McConnell has called himself the Grim Reaper. We have news for him. As I've said before, these bills are alive and well with the public, and public opinion, as Lincoln has said, can make almost anything happen. So we look forward to that. Questions? Wait a minute. Any new? Yes, ma'am. I'll come back to you.
Next week at this time, Robert Mueller will be here testifying. What is your expectation for his testimony? And is there a chance that after his long-awaited appearance, there might not be any further clarity on the findings of the special counsel's report?
Well, I think that the report has brought some clarity, and his own public statement brought further clarity. And now when he speaks about it, more people will know what is in the report. I think we should approach it with all of the appropriateness and seriousness of purpose. This is about our country, our Constitution, and the separation of powers, obstruction of justice, issues like that. So I would say that, again, it's about patriotism. Let us listen. Let us see where the facts will take us, and let us have this be as dignified as our Constitution would require. And then we'll see what happens after that. We go where the facts will lead us.
Green said today,
It's on the same subject.
he said that they will have the opportunity to punish
the president. We have to send him a message. We're not going to allow him to make America a racist country. Why is he wrong in the approach that he's taking?
What do you mean in terms of bringing up an impeachment? Well, for an impeachment, articles of impeachment to succeed, I haven't really actually seen his articles of impeachment, but are they about racism? We'll deal with that resolution on the floor. But as I have said over and over again, with all the respect in the world for Mr. Green, he's a very prayerful person, and he cares very much about our Constitution and our country. So as I say, with all the respect in the world for him, we have 6 committees that are working on following the facts in terms of any abuse of power, obstruction of justice, and the rest that the president may have engaged in. That is the serious path that we are on. Not that Mr. Green is not serious, but we'll deal with that on the floor.
Will you vote to table it? Will you vote to table it?
I don't know what we will do, but we will deal with it on the floor.
Madam Speaker, thank you. On the debt ceiling here, you've been talking to Stephen Mnuchin.
Yes.
What is the pathway now on that in spending caps, and what are the stumbling blocks to get this done before now and the end of next year?
Well, let's start with next week and engineer back. We would like to have something on the floor next Thursday. That is so that we can send it in a timely fashion to the Senate so that they can go through their, shall we say, particularly senatorial process to get it done in time before they leave. So if we're talking about next Thursday to be on the floor, we have to back up almost until this Friday to have an agreement reached so that we can duly note it. Because under the new rules, we don't count weekends in the 72-hour notice. So we'll have to have something that we can post sometime this weekend so that the time ticks away in order for us to go to rules to committee, rules and to the floor. So when we have an agreement, we'll write it up, and we have to do all of that by Friday evening.
What are the policy issues that are stalling this, or that you still have to resolve right now?
It's all about money, right? And so,
is there a certain number in terms of the non-deferred?
No, I think I said yesterday, I think if you read my letter, it was very clear. Our concern is that the additional initiatives that have been added for veterans, whether you approve of the policy or not, they have become the law, and we need to cover them. We don't think that that should be coming out of the regular base. And so we don't want the veterans' resources to be competing with each other or competing with other very valuable domestic priorities. So I think we are understanding each other, and when we have an announcement, you'll be the first to know. Yes.
On your House resolution condemning the president, were you surprised that more Republicans didn't side with Democrats? And what do you think, at the end of the day, was achieved, given that it was essentially a party line vote?
Well, the fact is that it was a resolution of the House and not some legislation that has to go to the Senate or be signed by the president. And it was for us to say, and by the way, in the most gentle way. You have no idea the provisions that some people wanted to have in that resolution. This was as benign. It condemned the words of the president, not the president, but the words of the president. And in doing so, it anchored itself in the words of Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan, beautiful speech by Ronald Reagan, which I reference all the time. And so you would have thought that benign approach might have appealed to them. But when you say, were you surprised? Were you disappointed? My expectations are not great, but you always hope that they might do the right thing and say that language that the president used was beneath the dignity of the president, beneath the dignity of the people who was criticizing him. And by the way, we were offended that he spoke in such a way about members of Congress, but we're offended that he says that about people across the country all the time. Go back where you came from. And that, by its definition, those words are racism. You go look in the AP and other places where they define certain words. That's what that is. But we weren't saying that he was racist. We were saying that the words that he used were racist. So that was as gentle as it could be, considering the inappropriateness and the disgusting nature of what the president said. So that we did what our members wanted to do and had a very strong 100% vote on it.
The president is clearly trying to cast this broader debate as a choice between him and your more progressive members. This fight has now dominated the conversation this week. You've had your resolution. The Democrats are rallying behind these members. Are you concerned that the president is goading you? Is there
No, you know what? With all due respect, let's not waste our time on that. We're talking about what we're going to do to help the American people. Our caucus is unified on all of that. Throughout the whole campaign, I said to the candidates, don't even mention his name. Everybody knows who he is. You don't have to describe him to anybody. Let's just talk about what we are going to do. And we're going to devote the whole month of August to our For the People agenda, which was successful in terms of connecting with people and their concerns. It's still the cost of health care, the stagnation of wages, and the distrust of government are still loom large as concerns for the American people, and that's what we're going to be about. We're not having him set our agenda, we're setting our own agenda.
Yes, do you have any concerns that the focus on impeachment today and the votes on the floor related to it could jeopardize Robert Mueller's appearance next week?
No, I think we'll get rid of all this right now. We did our resolution expeditiously. We'll deal with the Mr. Green's resolution, but we do have to have a clear path. I do think that the president is trying to. And we cannot, and you cannot, and we cannot buy into his fog that he wants to create over everything, because he knows, we all know the argument that can be made against us in terms of our philosophy, in terms of our priorities and the rest. And the president knows the argument that could be made against him, and therefore he wants to distract from him. You have to give him credit. He's a great distractor. And that's what this is about. So it is, let's just take it to a better place. Let's take it to a better place. America. The president wants to make America great again. We all do. What does that mean? What is America? So many times we've come together and we've talked about America. America as our ideals in the Constitution, an example to the world of founding documents that rejected a monarch and put forth separation of powers. Article 1, the legislative branch having that priority enlisting, and that is being that's being dishonored by the President of the United States. What is America? We the people. we the people, nation of immigrants, by and large, and he is denigrating all the newcomers who come to our country in complete opposition to the beautiful words of Ronald Reagan in the last speech that he made to the country as President of the United States. It is America, this beautiful land, from sea to shining sea and beyond, and God's gift to us that he is almost every day, but certainly every week, degrading and saying that we're not going to deal with climate on the basis of any science. Really? What is America? Our values. And that's the debate we have all the time in the battle of the budget and the rest, in terms of how we invest in our children's future and how these things all come together under the guidance of our founders. We the people, they said in the preamble to the Constitution, but they also said, e pluribus unum, from anyone. Couldn't imagine how many or how different we'd be, but they knew we had to be one. And that beautiful guidance, it's something that we must constantly keep in mind as we engage in our differences. So at the end of the day, we want to be unifying and not dividing. I wish the president would read that. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi delivering comments on the motion last night, the resolution to impeach President Trump today, and what she thinks the president's strategy is versus what Democratic strategy is with respect to the country, with respect to the president, the investigations into the president, and with respect to what she calls the president's remarkable ability to distract Americans from issues that they would otherwise be talking about. Let's go to Kelly O'Donnell, who was listening to this as well. Kelly, what did you take from that? What was the most important thing?
I think Speaker Pelosi is trying to turn down the temperature, not to create another issue where there could be a flare-up between her caucus and the White House, and putting the pressure back on the president. So this was Speaker Pelosi carefully plotting some of the steps that need to be taken. For example, she did not preview how the impeachment inquiry resolution brought by Congressman Green of Texas would be handled. This, in a news conference, she could have signaled which way she would want to go with that. She didn't do that, kind of keeping the temperature down. Also, very clearly saying that the resolution condemning the president's tweets was something that had, in effect, been watered down, if you will, from the suggestions of the caucus, some of which were more harsh about the president's words and wanting to make a stronger statement, and that she really tailored it to try to be a bit more, while holding him to account, not trying to instigate yet another fight. So that is an interesting wrinkle in this day, especially because we know the president is going to have his rally tonight. This was originally supposed to be the day that Robert Mueller was testifying. That's been rescheduled now for next week. And so the president was going to have a big arena crowd type event where he can vent on all of these issues. And so now we'll have the juxtaposition of Speaker Pelosi really trying to kind of go down the more measured approach today, and the president, who we expect will have very tough campaign-style rhetoric, including, we're told, from campaign officials, expect more about the 4 congresswomen who have been referred to as the squad, that he would be attacking them for not their personal characteristics or their life experience, but their positions. A lot of that gets murky when you begin to make those challenges, but that's what the president intends to do. As you heard in the questioning there, the issue of, is the president trying to make these 4 women members of Congress the face of the Democratic Party, kind of a new counterpoint to Nancy Pelosi for the president to run against. Speaker Pelosi is trying to keep things a little calmer today after what has been an eventful week here on Capitol Hill. Allie?
And I want to bring Casey Hunt in as well, who was in the room when that press conference was taking place. Casey, you were talking about the thing that Kelly just mentioned was supposed to be happening today, and that was the Mueller testimony. You asked Nancy Pelosi a question about the Mueller investigation.
That's been something that's kind of been underneath the radar here today. Conversations about how this sudden focus on impeachment may impact whether or not Robert Mueller comes up next week under the terms that Democrats are looking for, because don't forget, those conversations are still underway. It was supposed to be today. They put it off for a week, partly because they wanted more members of Congress to be able to ask questions of Robert Mueller. Nancy Pelosi was very quick to dismiss that. She said, you know, we're going to, she called him the president the great distractor, that, you know, he has been driving this conversation about racism and immigrants through the tweets that he put out on Sunday. And that, of course, has been been the focus. We're now on Wednesday, which is more than halfway through a congressional week. And of course, now Congressman Green, who we should point out has done this before. This time, his articles of impeachment are saying that this should not be acceptable. The racism should not be acceptable from a chief executive. So that's the grounds on which he's putting these forward. She wouldn't show her hand on how they're going to dispatch this. There's a couple different options, procedurally speaking. One of the more likely ones might be to vote to send the articles to the House Judiciary Committee. That's in Congress speak called tabling the motion. But they are going to have to, grapple with this in some way, and people are going to have to be on the record. And while clearly some Democrats want to talk about it, it's not necessarily what the center, the leadership of the party wants to be focused on today. So, we will see if, in fact, they do actually move off of it quickly or not. But, the reality, Allie, here is that what the president did, if anything, unified a Democratic Party, or at least papered over some significant divisions between Pelosi and the quote-unquote squad, and really kind of helped get everybody on the same page. So we'll see if that holds as the week continues, Allie.
And Nancy Pelosi did not seem to want to get baited into a conversation about the squad, about these 4 members of Congress, other than to say that what the president did was incorrect. She was not taking any conversation. She was not taking any of the questions that had to do with that continuing conversation. So, in other words, you're calling it papering over. She definitely did not want that to be central to the conversation.
She, divisions between her and the quote-unquote squad are not something that she wants to talk about. And, there have been some serious incidents that have really made members angry. Some of them have been, what AOC's chief of staff has said on Twitter, accusations kind of flying back and forth, very personal insults. And, of course, Pelosi herself spoke with Maureen Dowd in that column where she, talked about their public following or their Twitter, whatever, I believe, was the quote from Pelosi. That sort of set this all off. And it was a week ago when we had a press conference where she got very sharp in the face of questions about that and essentially tried to shut it all down. It's not a place that she wants to be. I thought it was a little bit interesting that in the press conference today, she said that the resolution they passed yesterday was, if anything, she didn't use the words watered down, but basically that it could have gone much further. It could have been much more incendiary. She said to us, you wouldn't believe what some people wanted to put in this resolution, which I thought was an interesting way of framing what some of her own members likely wanted. But clearly she's trying to steer this in a direction of focusing on, Ronald Reagan, Republican presidential luminary and icon, and away from these divisions in the party. Allie.
Thank you to you, Casey, and thank you to Kelly O'Donnell. We will, of course, continue to monitor this conversation and bring you more on it as it happens. Also, I'm going to be speaking to Bernie Sanders very shortly. He is going to be making a significant speech about health care and his proposal for Medicare for all a little later on, so he'll be joining me in a few minutes. President Trump continues his attacks against the 4 congresswomen of color. Did you know, because I didn't know this, 5% of Congress members were born abroad? I'm going to talk to one of them, Norma Torres of California, next. You're watching Velshit Rule live on MSNBC.
If my life is about making music, my drive needs to be all about hearing it.
You have to rely on your gear, the way it feels, the way it does exactly what you need it to do.
Health care costs under the plan advocated by Senator Bernie Sanders and others is estimated to cost $4.5 trillion over 10 years. Now, that sounds like a lot of money, but take a look at this. The estimate is about 22% higher than total costs under the current system over the same period. Remember, a lot of people don't get coverage right now. According to the CDC, this would provide, Medicare for All would provide coverage to about 28 million people who are currently insured. I'm not telling you that's the reason to support it. I'm just saying we're currently uninsured. I'm just saying math is always hard. Whenever anybody says, how are you going to pay for this, we have to explain what you're already paying for. Joining me from Capitol Hill is Senator Sanders. Senator Sanders, former Vice President Biden's plan builds on the current healthcare system, Obamacare, even though that's kind of been gutted by Republicans, but it would allow people to keep their employer insurance if they like it or buy into a public option. if the plan that the vice president is suggesting continues to include the essential health benefits that the Affordable Care implemented, why do you think that wouldn't be sufficient?
Well, first of all, I'll be getting back to the first point you made a moment ago. Virtually every study out there shows that Medicare for all will cover all of the people in our country at less cost than the current dysfunctional system, which at the end of 10 years will be spending something like $50 trillion. So healthcare is expensive. The reason that I oppose what Vice President Biden is talking about is that at the end of the day, we have got to do as a nation what every other major country on earth is doing, guarantee health care to every man, woman, and child as a right. The current system, let us be clear, is not to provide quality care to all. It is to make billions in profit for the insurance companies and the drug companies, and that is exactly what they are doing. Today, despite the fact that 80 million Americans have no health insurance or are underinsured, we are spending far, far more per capita on health care than the people of any other country. Today, we pay by far the highest prices in the...
He's a very prayerful person, and he cares very much about our Constitution and our country. So, as I say, with all the respect in the world for him, we have 6 committees that are working on following the facts in terms of any abuse of power, obstruction of justice, and the rest that the president may have engaged in. That is the serious path that we are on. Not that Mr. Green is not serious, but we'll deal with that on the floor.
Will you vote to table it? Will you vote to table it?
I don't know what we will do, but we will deal with it on the floor.
Madam Speaker, thank you. On the debt ceiling here, you've been talking to Stephen Mnuchin.
Yes.
What is the pathway now on that in spending caps, and what are the stumbling blocks to get this done before now and the end of next year?
Well, let's start with next week and engineer back. We would like to have something on the floor next Thursday. That is so that we can send it in a timely fashion to the Senate so that they can go through their, shall we say, particularly senatorial process to get it done in time before they leave. So if we're talking about next Thursday to be on the floor, we have to back up almost until this Friday to have an agreement reached so that we can duly note it. Because under the new rules, we don't count weekends in the 72-hour notice. So we'll have to have something that we can post sometime this weekend so that the time ticks away in order for us to go to rules to committee, rules and to the floor. So when we have an agreement, we'll write it up, and we have to do all of that by Friday evening.
What are the policy issues that are stalling this, or that you still have to resolve right now?
It's all about money, right? And so,
is there a certain number in terms of the non-defined?
No, I think I said yesterday, I think if you read my letter, it was very clear. Our concern is that the additional initiatives that have been added for veterans, whether you approve of the policy or not, they have become the law and we need to cover them. We don't think that that should be coming out of the regular base. And so we don't want the veterans' resources to be competing with each other or competing with other very valuable domestic priorities. So I think we are understanding each other, and when we have an announcement, you'll be the first to know.
Yes. On your House resolution condemning the president, were you surprised that more Republicans didn't side with Democrats? And what do you think, at the end of the day, was achieved, given that it was essentially a party line vote?
Well, the fact is that it was a resolution of the House and not some legislation that has to go to the Senate or be signed by the president. And it was for us to say, and by the way, in the most gentle way. You have no idea the provisions that some people wanted to have in that resolution. This was as benign. It condemned the words of the president, not the president, but the words of the president. And in doing so, it anchored itself in the words of Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan, beautiful speech by Ronald Reagan, which I reference all the time. And so you would have thought that benign approach might have appealed to them. But when you say, were you surprised, were you disappointed, my expectations are not great, but you always hope that they might do the right thing and say that that language that the president used was beneath the dignity of the president, beneath the dignity of the people who was criticizing. And by the way, we were offended that he spoke in such a way about members of Congress, but we're offended that he says that about people across the country all the time. Go back where you came from. And that, by its definition, those words are racism. You go look in the AP and other places where they define certain words. That's what that is. But we weren't saying that he was racist. We were saying that the words that he used were racist. So that was as gentle as it could be, considering the inappropriateness and the disgusting nature of what the president said. So that we did what our members wanted to do and had